Hi, this is our story of reviving a Xerox colour printer. The particular model is a C400DN, which is a double-sided printing desktop colour printer. Quite a nice machine. The upshot was that we had a firmware upgrade which went wrong. I'll go through the story first of why we upgraded, and then the tortuous path of finding a way of recovering the printer from being bricked by the software. So we had a warning notice or an advice notice that there was a software update available on the C400 printer, and so we thought probably we should check to see if it's okay. So first we found out which version we had on the printer, and there's this. When you power up the printer, normally there's a status page which prints out and gives the different version numbers of the different parts of the software and the hardware. So the one we wanted was System, and we currently have version 67.51.51. There are other ways of discovering it, but the page is quite a convenient way of doing it. And on some printers that page might be switched off. So to locate the new firmware, we went to Google to find the Xerox site, put in the name of the printer and firmware download, and this is a pretty good way of tracking down the new firmware. We had tried just loading the firmware from the printer itself, but that hadn't worked. So this is the Xerox page on the website. It's a clipped version. There's more so you can be sure you've got the right one. And we said we want to download for Windows 10 64-bit. We want to get firmware, and that was there. Apply the filters, and it came back with this version, which is 67.71.21. And so we downloaded that. But in the process of downloading, you get this chart pops up, and it says you want to go to 67.71.21. You need to check that what your current version of the firmware is on your device. We were having an older version, so we couldn't go straight to the new version of 67.71.21. And we have to install an intermediate software level called 67.59.1. And this enables the later installation of 67.71.21 down there. Not difficult to do. So our first step was to get the firmware associated with the 67.59.1. We downloaded it and popped it onto our desktop PC, ready for uploading using the administrator web interface to the C400 printer. This is the file which we were actually going to download, the one which ends in the .bin. Then, after doing that, we went on to install the latest version after the intermediate version on the printer. And this is the software which we had. Unfortunately, unlike the previous upgrade, the process stuck at 85% on the C400 printer. And then after a while, we had an error message called write error 041-500. After we had this error, the printer would not restart. All we would get is a console message eventually which said boot error. So there was the printer was effectively bricked, and we couldn't use it, couldn't access it, and there seemed to be no obvious way of getting it back to a working status. There was nothing in the manual. There was we called it Xerox support, and we discovered our printer was out of maintenance contract. But the lady said an engineer would call us back. 4 or 5 days after that, nothing's happened so far. We did a lot of research to see if we could find a specific fix for the C400 after firmware upgrade failure, and there was nothing really there. But by reading around, we discovered that the C400 has a hidden startup menu, which will let you boot from a USB device, or actually not boot, but transfer data, the software from a USB device. And it's called the special boot menu. And we found it actually on a C7000 printer, which is a much bigger printer, service manual, and it's called the GP22 special boot modes. First piece of advice from us is don't use a special boot menu unless you are really desperate. I saw several pieces of advice online when I was doing the research that it's very easy to screw up your printer or brick your printer using this special boot menu, but in our case we had no alternative. Our printer was not booting. With the toner which we had installed at the time, it was an 800-pound paperweight, so we needed to do something. So the hidden menu, as I said earlier, provides a facility to install the operating system from a USB stick that has been correctly formatted. So just to repeat, do this entirely at your own risk. We don't guarantee it will work in your case, and do your own research, but it worked for us. So preparing a USB stick, you need to get a version of the firmware. We went for the last known working version, which was the 6759.01. We extracted that to using WinZip to get the bin file to put it onto the USB stick. First, we formatted the USB stick to give a blank disk USB stick, and then we had to create a directory which is specifically called DWLD. Don't know why, but that's just the way things work. And you then copy the bin file from your PC onto the download directory on the USB stick. And so that was the binary file from the extracted firmware. And at the end of the process, remember to use the file manager to eject the USB stick to make sure all of the files have closed properly. And this is a copy of what we discovered on one of the bits of documentation for another machine, but essentially it goes through the process again of download firmware, have a folder called download, store the software download file into the download folder, switch off the machine, insert the memory stick, and then do a special boot, which is called in Xerox parlance GP22, and go to the special boot menu. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And then go to the that download part, say yes to the process, and it will then take the software from the USB stick and install it in the printer memory. One point of warning, don't switch it off whilst that process is taking place. You can really screw up your machine. Eventually I found this YouTube video which goes somebody going through the process of doing that type of upgrade. I'm not quite sure which printer he was on, to be honest, and the audio is not very good, but it does actually show you the process. Here's a bit more from the Xerox documentation. You'll see it's for the Big Brother printers, and it goes through the process of getting to the special boot modes. And it's a bit secret squirrel. Once you've got the menu up, you do that by holding down the home and the power buttons when you power up the machine, and then the special boot mode will appear, and then you have to simultaneously touch the A in special and the B in boot on the screen and the home button, and then release simultaneously. You should then get a keypad screen for entering a code number, and that code number is 6789#. Then you get the first special boot menu screen for the download display, and then you can get on with the process of installing the firmware on your machine. This is what the special boot menu looks like, and you can see that it doesn't have any reference to the download process. So that's the point where you hold pressing on the A and the B and the home key simultaneously on the printer. So if all goes well, and it was a relatively short process in our case, the download from the USB stick should install a new copy of the firmware operating system without affecting any user data. At the end of the process, the printer should reboot. And a reminder, don't power off the machine during the firmware load. Finally, remove the USB stick, and you should be good to go if all has gone well. So our analysis of the situation, we were very surprised that the Xerox firmware upgrade process could cause the potential loss of a printer, and we didn't get a lot of help from Xerox themselves in fixing it. Perhaps it was a failure of the Xerox software engineers to fully test the process on older machines. Ours is a 5-year-old printer. Maybe there's something in the older machines that the new software just doesn't take account of. The firmware upgrade process should have better built-in checking to make sure that the precursors are right. And so we should have had a warning message saying, you can't do this because. The manual recovery process, which we discovered, was fiddly, but not difficult to do once we pieced together all of the elements of that. It wasn't all in one place, and it took us about 4 hours of research to track it down eventually. The whole process should have been better documented by Xerox. So thank you very much, and that's the end of the story.